Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live event. I'm just going to invite my colleague on the stage. All right. Well, just while we wait for a few minutes for people to join. Oh, there's Joelle. Hi, Joelle. How are you?
Hi, Raphael.
Good. I was just going to ask people maybe in the chat while we're waiting, you can introduce yourself. So on the right side, you should be able to see chat and give us a little bit of introduction. Tell us where you are watching from today. All right. Hi, Francois from Montreal.
And also, just to let everyone know, we have the chat and the questions tab. So if you have any questions, please make sure to put your questions in the questions tab and keep the chats in the chat tab.
Yeah, perfect. All right, I see some more people are joining. So if you're just joining us now, we're going to get started in a few minutes. On the right side of your screen, you will see a chat panel. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us where you are watching from today. Hi, Joelle. We have a very shy audience so far.
Yeah,
no one wants to tell us where they are.
It's okay. You can just say hi if you'd like.
You can just say hi. All right. Hi, Sally.
Hi, Sally. We'll give it a couple more minutes and then we'll get started.
Oh, we've got Yaya as well. Hello.
Hi, Vishvam.
Vishvam. Nice to see you.
All right. So a few more people coming in. Anyone else want to say hi? All right. So I think we'll get started because we want to make sure we have time to answer all the questions at the end of the session. So just for a little housekeeping before we get started, if you didn't hear before, we want to make sure that everyone has asks their questions and that we get to them all. So please ask your questions in the questions tab. And if you want to chat with other people in the group, please use the chat tab. And yeah, we can get started now. So welcome everybody. I'm here from Montreal, Billdr Montreal, and Raphael's here from Toronto. And we're excited to be here today to chat with you about the 5 things you need to know before starting your major home renovation. We're going to start off with I'm going to start off doing a little intro, and then I'm going to introduce Raphael, and then he's going to really get into it and talk about the 5 things that you need to know. And then after that, I'll tell you a little bit more about Billdr and what we offer, and then we're going to dive into our 30-minute Q&A. So get your questions ready. You can put them in the questions tab throughout the session, and you can upvote other people's questions so that we can prioritize the ones that everybody wants to know about first.
All right, awesome.
So I'm going to introduce Raphael. So Raphael's my colleague. Like I mentioned, he's from Toronto. He is the general manager in Toronto and also a project manager at Billdr. He recently worked as an associate at McKinsey and a project supervisor at Mortensen Construction. He holds an MBA and a bachelor's degree in civil and structural engineering from U of T. We're really lucky to have him here today. So welcome, Raphael. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Joelle. Very excited to be here and really excited to kind of, dive into what you really need to know about starting your own home renovation. So let's dive in. So I just wanted to start with a little bit of a picture of what construction is like today. Many people that I've talked to are often who are going through their first construction project or have done several construction projects are always really surprised. They're like, why is it that every construction project seems to go over budget and over schedule? And the crazy thing is this is not just specific to home renovation or commercial construction. This is actually an industry-wide problem. And so in a recent report from McKinsey, where I used to work before, they did a study where they looked at over 100 projects that were performed in 2000 to 2010, all different kinds of projects, even some oil and gas and mining projects. But what they found consistently across the board is that on average, projects always seem to take 20% longer to finish than initially scheduled. And they almost always go over budget. Sometimes as much as in some cases double or triple what they were budgeted for in the beginning. And this is crazy. And if you talk to a lot of people in construction, people who have spent their entire lives in construction, it almost becomes an acknowledged fact that, hey, it's just construction. That's the way it is. Construction always goes over budget and over schedule. But why should it be that way? Why is it so difficult to actually get an accurate cost and an actual schedule up front? One of the other things that we see in construction is in most developed countries, the productivity rates have not actually improved since the 1990s. So, in the past 30 years, while we have extremely sophisticated mobile smartphones that are thousands of times faster than the computers we had in the 1990s, we have electric vehicles, we have, hundreds of satellites in orbit. We just flew a helicopter on Mars, but construction has not changed since the 1990s. And another thing that I guess goes without saying, but construction today is amongst probably one of two industries that is almost sees zero digitization. The other one would be agriculture. And the other thing to keep in mind is that there is there's a new wave of startups that are trying to bring new tech into the construction space, especially in the last 5 years. There's been a lot of new development, but many of those solutions tend to focus on commercial and industrial construction and leave residential construction behind. Anyways, I am one that I have suffered from the same problem. The condo that you're seeing me from was constructed 2 years late. And that was apparently quite normal for the developer. So, we've all kind of faced this at one point or another. And this is something that, I'm going to try and talk about. Not to say that you can totally eliminate the risk and always guarantee an on-time and on-budget project, but hopefully the lessons that you'll learn from today's session will help you beat the odds and do everything that is in your control to ensure that your projects are a success. So that's what we're going to talk about today. All right. And like Joelle mentioned, if at any point you have a comment, if something's surprising, if you want to chat, feel free to do so, all on the right side of the screen. You'll also see a questions tab. You can start putting your questions there during the presentation. And then we'll get to them in the Q&A at the end of the presentation in about 20 minutes. So let's dive in. What are the 5 things you need to know? So number 1, you need to define your objectives and constraints. You really need to understand what the goals for the project are. It's kind of natural human tendency to want to dive into a project and start looking at samples of tiles and talking to contractors. But many people don't actually take the time up front to actually reflect a little bit on what it is that they want to accomplish. And that can have major implications on the scope and the budget of the project. And so, some of the things that you'll want to ask yourself when you're a couple months from starting a project, what are actually your main objectives? What are you actually trying to achieve? Are you trying to make a space more livable? Are you trying to flip a house? Do you want to kind of spruce up your house to get it ready for the market? What is necessary versus nice to have? I mean, if something's broken in your house, if you have a non-functional kitchen, well, it's pretty necessary to get yourself a functional kitchen so that you can cook and eat. But then if you're talking about going from, a 3/4 inch, Korean countertop to a 1 inch, marble countertop, well, those are where you start to get into things that are maybe nice to have versus necessary, and that's okay. But it's important to know the distinction between the two. Another thing that you'll want to think about, what is actually your intended use of the property? Because this can have massive implications on your selection of materials and other design decisions that you're going to make. So for example, is this a property that you're going to rent out? If you do, you probably want to spend less money on finishings, make sure you get really good value materials that are more durable, versus if it's a place that you actually intend to occupy, maybe you're going to splurge a little more because you want to enjoy your space. And when do you plan on selling? Is this a short-term thing? Is it a long-term investment? If you're just looking to do the bare minimum to get a house on market, that's very different than renovating the home that you want to spend, the next 10 to 15 years and then raise your family. And all those things will be very important in defining your scope later on. And then finally, what are your constraints? What are the things that are non-negotiable? Do you have a firm timeline? Do you have a baby on the way? Do you desperately need more space in your house? Do you need to fix something that's broken? Do you have a leak? Do you have another place that you can stay? These are all things that will affect ultimately the timeline of your project. And depending on how flexible you are, that will help you define the scope accordingly. And another big thing, aside from just time, but how much are you willing and able to spend? You'll want to look into that ahead of time, right? You never want to just embark on a construction with no kind of ceiling on what you're going to spend. That's very dangerous. And also you want to understand how you're going to finance your project. In Canada, the laws behind lending are quite strict. So it's not a given that you can always get a loan to renovate your house. It will depend on things like, your income and the amount of equity you've already built in your existing home. Obviously interest rates as well. All those will factor into how much you can actually borrow. And so you'll want to make sure that if you're looking to finance your project from a bank, that you do talk to the bank ahead of time and understand what your options are. Okay, so now you know kind of the goals and the boundaries. What's the next step? Well, now you actually want to get a bit more granular, a bit more detailed, and you want to actually define a detailed scope of work. And so in doing this, you're kind of going from, I want to renovate a kitchen to, I now want to renovate a 12-foot by 12-foot kitchen. I need to redo the cabinets. I want a quartz countertop. I need 200 square foot of engineered hardwood. This is the difference between going from an overall goal now to more specific scope. And some of the things that you can kind of do to help you get to that process is, first off, look for inspiration. There's so many good ideas out there. Pinterest is amazing. You can search for almost anything home renovation related in Pinterest and scroll through endless pictures and ideas. You can do the same on Instagram. There are probably people you can follow on other social media platforms. You can take pictures of friends' houses or hotels, but you'll want to start like almost collecting a scrapbook or a mood board of those ideas. Those will be very helpful later on when you're actually talking about materials and hiring a contractor. You also want to take detailed measurements and pictures. It'll save you a lot of time if you have those up front. When you're trying to get accurate pricing later on, and when you're talking to contractors, you'll have all those numbers ready. And if there are a lot of tools out there now, like smartphone apps, that can help you, very easily draw floor plans. You don't necessarily need to have a lot of experience in CAD to be able to do it yourself. But those are things that if you invest the time in up front, you'll have a much better understanding of the space and the quantities, and you'll be able to use that to build a detailed estimate. Doing 3D renderings of your space is also a great way to be able to actually visualize. It's one thing to look at a 2D floor plan. It's quite a different thing to actually see your space in 3D before you begin construction. You'll want to identify materials and quality of finishing, like I mentioned before. You can talk to contractors and trades to get ideas. Another thing very important that you do want to do is also understand what permits you might require to do your project. And I just saw Rose from Toronto. Hello, Rose. So one of the places that you can go to actually check if you need a permit is a website called BizPal. This works in both Toronto and Montreal. One of the crazy things about Toronto, for those of you who are here, the Greater Toronto Area is not one city. It's actually 25 independent municipalities, each one having their own permitting requirements, their own building departments, their own inspectors, their own rules. And so, depending on whether you're in Vaughan or Markham or Oakville or City of Toronto, there will be a different process and a different timeline and different requirements. So you'll want to make sure that you check ahead of time what those requirements are. The lead time for getting all the documents in order, submitting them for approval, that can take months. So the sooner you start, the better. And building permits aren't required for all projects, by the way, but if you're doing anything structural, changing the layout, adding or removing walls, doing anything, plumbing, electrical, HVAC related, there's a good chance you'll need one. So be sure to check. All right, now we get into the most important and the most exciting. This is risk management. You might recall there's a famous speech by Donald Rumsfeld in 2002, who's the U.S. Secretary of Defense at the time, and he was talking about known knowns and unknown knowns and unknown unknowns. This is the matrix that literally every organization will use as a framework in some shape or form to assess risk. It works for a nuclear power plant. It also works for your home renovation or for the U.S. Department of Defense. But let me kind of walk you through it, and going through this process will actually help you not only refine your scope, but understand where there are risks and opportunities that might result in extra cost and extra time to complete your project. And for many of these, there are actually things that you can do before you begin construction so that you reduce surprises later on. So let's start in the top left. So known risks, right? These are things that you know today that are known risks. Common example, you've probably heard it all over the media, lumber prices. We know that lumber prices today are 3 times higher than they were 6 months ago. So if you're doing a renovation project where you need wood as a building material, which is pretty much every renovation project, on the material price, you can expect a 3 times increase, right? If you're using old pricing or old material prices or old benchmarks, they are not going to cover that increase. And that could be an unpleasant surprise. So that's something that you know about. You can build it into your model, right? Into your budget. Another thing, for example, is when we get into the top right, known unknowns. These are question marks, but they're question marks that are there. They're not surprises. So let me give you an example. Let's say you've got a wall partitioning your kitchen and your living area. You want to make an open concept. We just did an article on this last month. There's a big debate about whether you should do open concept or not. But let's say you do, and you want to bring down that wall. So what do? That there's a chance that wall is load bearing. If it's load bearing, it's going to cost a lot of extra money and take additional time to be able to remove. Why? Because you need to get an engineer drawing that's stamped and approved for how your house is going to be supported without that wall there. And typically you're going to spend more in materials. You can't just take a sledgehammer and knock the wall down, but you have to put something up in its place. And that results in additional time. Now, if you choose not to investigate before you start construction, you're kind of leaving it to chance, which is not good, especially if you need to pause your project for 4 weeks to get a new permit approved or structural drawings done. And so that's definitely something that you would want to investigate beforehand. contract a structural engineer, have them come, cut a hole in the wall, look at what's in there, and do the plans beforehand when you apply for your building permit the first time. Now we get into unknown risks that are unknown today. There are always things that can kind of come at you in a project. So in the unknown known risks category, let's call these like common risks. You don't know if they apply to you, but they might, or there's a good chance that they might. Most common example is if you're doing anything with an old house. A house that was built in the 1950s will have any number of surprises. A lot of the common things that we find all the time, you will commonly find electrical wiring that is not up to code that needs to be replaced. Or same thing with plumbing, same thing with HVAC, right? And so in many of those cases, you might want to be a bit more conservative and assume that you actually have to replace all the wiring in the area that you're renovating. You know, just a project that I was talking to a contractor the other week, from a single bungalow in Scarborough that was built in the 1950s. He said he removed somewhere between 2 to 4 kilometers of wiring from that house. How is that even possible? Well, it's because every time a previous owner did something, changed the lightings, added a plug, did some kind of a renovation, they just kept adding a wire, add another wire, add a wire. So when they actually took down the walls, they found 2 to 4 kilometers of old wiring that had to be removed. That was a surprise, right? But that happens all the time in old houses, so you want to kind of account for that. Unknown unknowns, these are things that could happen at any time. This is most of the time, it's something that is either behind a wall or below the ground that you can't see and have no clue is there, right? So if you're doing anything like with a basement, like basement underpinning, or you're putting in a new foundation, doing anything foundation related, you might run into issues. That's the biggest source of unknown unknowns. You might also knock down a wall and find an extra wall, or you might find a decaying animal, or all kinds of things. Like, you know, it's happened. So what you can do in this case, you're not going to know until you demo the house or demo that area. And so we always recommend that people have at least a 10% buffer. So if your construction contract comes in at $100,000 and you sign it, make sure that you have financing for at least $110,000, because the last thing you want to do is run out of budget and you know, you don't have money to pay for those important changes. All right, now that you've done all that work, you're finally ready to develop your detailed budget, right? Which is exciting because now you get to know how much your project is actually going to cost. Now, there are a lot of different ways. What I want to kind of teach you to watch out for is the red flags, right? What are the red flags you should look out for when trying to price your project? You know, the first is if you've only used kind of an online calculator or a square footage benchmark, like something that says your project should cost between $100 and $200 a square foot, those estimates are like plus or minus 30% accurate at best, if that. Until you actually build a detailed estimate where you literally identify, you know, specific materials, actual measurements, you know, you've kind of done an assessment of your house and looked out for any red flags that might result in additional cost, you're never going to get to a plus or 10% plus or minus 10% estimate. Another thing to watch out for, and this happens a lot in Toronto, I'm sure it happens in Montreal as well, is if somebody gives you a quote, sight unseen, big red flag. It's really hard. If you say, I want to renovate my basement, and someone tells you $5,000 and they haven't seen a plan, they haven't visited your property, they haven't seen a photo, there's no way that quote is that quote is accurate. So you should actually just disregard it. Don't even consider that as an objective price point. And the other thing that you want to think about in terms of budgeting, once you get to finishes, you can see a huge variation. So this comes into play, especially with kitchens and bathrooms. You know, you can go, if you want to redo a standard kitchen, you can go anywhere from like, you know, $3,000 to $5,000 for like a basic IKEA kitchen, up to tens of thousands of dollars for like a custom Italian kitchen. And so there's a huge variation in there. You really need to know kind of where you want to be in order to get an accurate price. Finally, the last thing that you can do once you've kind of narrowed down a detailed scope and you're going to contractors for pricing, make sure you get 2 to 3 quotes minimum. It's the only way that you can actually get competitive pricing. There are very few instances where you should ever go with the first quote you receive. Unless you've done work with that contractor before, you know them, you trust them, their family, like you should always get comparative quotes. That process is the only way to guarantee that you're going to get competitive pricing on your project. And then finally, like on the right, we've got a nice Venn diagram. Just watch out for things that are too good to be true. If you get something, a quote that is inexpensive, super fast, and high quality, it's most likely too good to be true. You should be asking questions, you should be asking to see more detail, and you should be getting more quotes from other contractors. And finally, most importantly, now you're getting ready to actually start your job, be sure to hire professionals, right? This is super important. Everyone who knows how to paint, everyone knows how to paint, but is not necessarily a painter. The same goes true for an electrician and almost every other trade. So if you're working with designers, right? Architects are licensed in the province of Ontario and province in Quebec, asked to see their license. That's very transparent. You also have technicians and interior designers. They can also have qualifications. In Ontario, they would have something called a BCIN, which is a building code identification number. That means that they've passed the Ministry of Housing exams, and they are qualified building practitioners, meaning that they can represent you, they can submit building permits, they can sign off on floor plans. Structural engineers, they need to be licensed by a provincial body. In Ontario, they will have Professional Engineers Ontario, a PEng designation. And in Quebec, they'll also have a professional engineering designation as well. Where we get into a bit of a gray area is when you get into your general contractor, which unfortunately is where 90% of your cost is ultimately going to end up. Now, if you live in Montreal, I don't know if I didn't see anyone who said we're in Montreal, but it's super transparent. There's a license called RBQ. Anyone who's a builder needs that license. If they don't have it, you don't work with them, it's easy. In Ontario, there's no such thing. We don't have an RBQ equivalent in Toronto. And so in lieu of that, you actually have to do a lot more due diligence on the contractors that you're working with. So things that you need to watch out for, you need to look at their experience. Do they have experience working in construction? And do they have past projects that they can show you and walk you through? What are qualifications that they do need? Well, in Ontario, for example, only certain trades actually have a qualification requirement. So for example, electricians, plumbers, and HVAC mechanics, they need a certificate of qualification from the Ontario Ministry of Labor. Electricians would need it from the Electrical Safety Authority. But many other trades and general contractors in general don't actually need a qualification. But what they do definitely need, the absolute bare minimum, is they should be a registered business, right? This means that they're a legitimate tax-paying business, which means that you're protected. Your rights as a consumer are protected by Ontario law, by the Consumer Protection Act. And so red flag to watch out for, if you had a contractor that wants you to pay in cash under the table, it's a good chance they might not be registered. You can always check that online. Make sure they're a registered business. Also, make sure they have insurance. You can only have insurance if you're a registered business. Most contractors will require at least $2 million in general commercial liability insurance. That means that if there's property damage, if there's a fire, if someone gets injured, if there's a collision, if they damage your neighbor's property, then that will all be covered under insurance. If they don't have insurance, that cost is all on you. That's not something you want to have to pay for. And then finally, check out references, right? Look at their social media profile, look at past projects they've done, talk to previous clients. These are all things that you'll want to reference check before you start. And then last but not least, the one thing that I'll mention is document everything. Because at the end of the day, if you do encounter any issues along the way, going back to a written email, a contract, a formal quote that was sent to you, these are all documents that you can go back to when you start construction if you encounter any issues. So be sure to document everything. That's the end of the presentation. I wish you all the best of luck in your project. We're going to have Q&A in just a few minutes, but I'm going to pass over to Joelle so she can tell you a bit more about Billdr and what we do.
Thanks, Raphael. So yeah, so I just want to tell you a little bit about what we do. So we support you with your home renovation projects from scope, definition, and contractor selection to project completion. We're with you every step of the way. And there's often a lack of transparency in this industry. And our team of project managers are here to make your life a whole lot easier. So, take a chance on us, check us out, and you'll be happy with what you see. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So we offer a detailed estimate for your project. So all of those things that Raphael just discussed, those 5 hot tips, we can help you with that. This gives you the opportunity to get a third-party budget estimate before you start getting quotes from general contractors. And we work with you to define the scope of work. We take detailed measurements, provide floor plans and 3D models, and you can then get quotes from our vetted network of general contractors. We also provide project management support throughout your project, and we support you with those 5 steps that Raphael just spoke about. So it's a good starting point for your project. And for projects over $50,000, we also offer a Project Management Plus plan. We provide assistance for material selection, project coordination, on-site visits, weekly status reports, review of deficiencies, and a final project report at the end of the project. And in case there are disagreements, we also provide mediation support. And this is something that is not yet announced, so you're the first to hear about this. We have just launched in Toronto, so we have a special promotion starting next month. We'll cover the Project Management Plus fee for the first 10 projects with a signed construction contract by June 15th in the Toronto and GTA area. We're also offering a $500 IKEA gift card for the first 20 clients. The full details will be announced in early May, so stay tuned. But here's the promo code that you can enter when you post your project on our platform. I'll include the promo code in the chat shortly. And we're about to start the Q&A session. So you're free to book a consultation with Raphael at any time. And if we don't get to your question today, you can always book a time with him to meet with him and ask your question directly. I'll add this also in the chat. So I think we're ready to get started. So Raphael, are you ready for our questions?
Yes, absolutely. So just a reminder, we'll stay on until all your questions are answered. If you do have questions, again, just type them in the questions panel on the right. I do see that we got our first question from Rose. So hi, Rose. And so Rose is asking, in a major renovation, how much time should you expect to spend weekly managing your project? That's actually a great question. I will say that it depends, right? It depends on the scale of your project and how fast it's moving. It also depends on what stage of the project you're in. If you're in like kind of an early, typically it tends to ramp up at the beginning and then things kind of get moving and it's not as much of a time commitment, but then when you start, closing, then it ramps up again. I would say that you should expect to spend, on a typical project, anywhere from 5 to 10 hours managing your project at minimum. things that will include, right? You'll want to visit the site. You'll want to talk to the contractor. Undoubtedly, you will have change orders that you need to review, right? So again, some of those risks, those unknown unknowns that you need to deal with during construction, that will be an extra conversation. You'll have to come to a solution with the contractor. That all takes time. You'll want to do proper take pictures quite frequently. The more presence you have on site, the better, because you can actually develop an accurate record of what was built. Like, imagine if you actually had a picture of what was behind every wall in your house because you were there when it was under construction. These are all things that will actually safeguard you if there are any questions later on. But that's why I would say like at least 5 to 10 hours. But for some projects, especially projects where you have a more intense construction schedule, or you're dealing with, major issues in a given week, you might spend as much as, 20 hours on a project. So it can very quickly start to feel like a part-time job. And that's why, a service like Billdr is great, because effectively you're hiring someone as a project manager to support you. All right. Do we have any other questions? You're welcome, Rose. Hope that was helpful. Do you have any questions, Joelle? Well, people might be thinking about additional questions to ask.
Yeah. So you had mentioned, like there's many different cities in Toronto, and like it's hard to really get an idea of all the different rules and all that stuff. So like, would it make sense to, check with your city for different specifications? Like, where would you go to find that information out? Oh, I think we lost Raphael.
Back. Sorry about that. My internet just went out, and I don't have Rogers. It's not Rogers. But, so sorry, Joelle, your question was around all the different requirements from municipalities in Toronto.
Yeah, I thought you didn't like my question.
Yeah, I didn't like it. Too difficult of a question. Yeah, so great question. This was one of the things that, we as Billdr, me personally, as the GM of Toronto, spent a lot of time trying to map out for Toronto. Again, the website, which I know you shared in the link, is a good starting spot, bizpal.ca. You can at least see all the different possible permits for every municipality in Toronto. Also, what's helpful is just go on the city's website where you reside. Every city, I can tell you, because I looked at every city's website, every city will have a page that will talk to you as a homeowner about how to get a building permit, right? So it's a very important process, because cities want to ensure that all buildings are safe and that they have a record of the floor plans of buildings. This is to ensure that people are living in safe structures. So luckily, there's a lot of information. If you know the municipality you're in, go to the website, download the guides. And the other thing that you can do, by the way, like sometimes people are afraid to call the building department. Don't be. They have all the information. Like recently, I talked to somebody who was buying a triplex. And they actually wanted to know, like, hey, is this triplex something that is legally registered with the city as a triplex? So that before they bought the property, they actually called the Toronto Building Department and said, hey, Toronto Building Department, what do you have on file for this property? And they're like, it's a single family dwelling and we have nothing on file. Right. So that at least tells you that whoever converted into a triplex before probably didn't do so with the building permit, which is a problem. But you can actually call the city and you can actually get floor plans for your building if it was registered when it was built. Don't be afraid to call and ask. It's there are service guidelines in place for building departments to ensure that they provide a high level of service, because ultimately it's in the city's best interest that you as a homeowner do things the right way. So luckily, they're usually quite transparent about all of that.
Perfect, thank you. I noticed that Aaron asked if we're going to be sharing the deck, and yes, we can share the deck. We'll send it through. I guess we'll just send it through to everyone after the presentation. You'll also get a live recording of the presentation, and yeah, so you will get the deck, Aaron. That was a long answer to a very simple question. Does anyone else have any questions? Otherwise, I have all kinds of questions.
All right, Aaron gave us thumbs up. Yeah, Thanks. Go ahead, Joelle. What other questions do you have?
So with all of the, I've heard there's like shortages in materials and things like that. And, how far in advance should you start planning your renovation?
Amazing question. Again, depends on the scope. So let's say you're doing a kind of a small renovation, like a kitchen or a bathroom. You don't need a building permit because you're not like changing anything structurally. You could, if you were really motivated and you found a good contractor, probably like get a contract signed in as little as 4 weeks. It typically does take a little longer than that, even for a small renovation. But typically what you want to watch out for is, the more, as your project grows in size and complexity, you will want, comparatively like more lead time to prepare your project. If you need a building permit, like I mentioned, that's where you want to ensure that you're starting 3 to 6 months before you anticipate, starting construction, because that process takes time. If you want to do something and you like iconic, you want to hire an architect or an interior designer, again, that process takes time. And all that work has to be done before a building permit is actually submitted. So again, you kind of want to think of 3 to 6 months for anything major. If you're looking at doing something seasonal, the sooner you can lock it in, the better. Okay, so if you want to do a pool or a backyard reno, you should start planning the summer before. If you've tried to do it this summer, you'll know that any like contractor doing outdoor landscaping, at least the good ones, are fully booked already. In cities like Toronto and Montreal, we have such a short, construction window for outdoor projects. And typically you want to make sure that your project starts in the spring so you can actually enjoy it. It's not going to sit, under a pile of snow for 6 months before you can actually use it. So anything that's seasonal, definitely you want to think of even earlier, like 12 months, 9 to 12 months in advance.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. So we have another question. John's came in first, so maybe we can, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, perfect. So, hey, John, John is asking, okay, aside from providing a quote without any information, what are other tips to quickly vet contractors during the first call interaction? Okay, it's a great question. I think the one thing that I always look for is what kind of questions is the contractor asking? Okay, ideally, if you're getting an experienced contractor, they're going to ask you all the right questions to get the details of your project. They're going to ask you if you already have a building permit. They're going to ask you if you have a designer. They're going to ask you a rough, what budget do you have in mind sometimes. They're going to ask you if you've already selected materials. Watch out for a good contractor is one that asks lots of questions, right? That's number one. Number two, I think professionality, right? You can often tell, like, Toronto's a very diverse community, right? So I would never discriminate against someone with like poor English, because sometimes they can be wonderful contractors. But other things you can look for in terms of professionalism would be like the time that it takes to respond to you. That's an obvious one. Contractors who are super responsive, well organized, follow up with you, send you emails that are very detailed. These are all really good things, to look out for as well. And another big thing, again, it's not something that you can necessarily quickly vet, but see if the contractor invites you to one of their active projects. Many of the good ones will do this because they have nothing to hide. So if in that first interaction they say, oh, you want to do like a basement reno? I'm doing one right now. Why don't you come by and check it out? That's a very good sign. And you should definitely take them up on that offer, because once you actually go there, you'll see the work that they're doing. You know, oftentimes they'll also kind of showcase a bit their knowledge, right? And that's where you'll get like a really good a good feeling from the contractor. So those are maybe 3 things that I would typically look out for.
That's great. Hopefully that. Okay.
Awesome. All right, Sally.
I think you answered Sally's question.
Oh, yeah. So Sally asked, is it possible to visit a current project? Yes. The only caveat that I would say right now is we are obviously in COVID times. That being said, residential construction projects in Ontario are still allowed to continue even under the new restrictions, as long as the project was started before April 17th. And so as long as you're following kind of COVID protocols and you're comfortable doing so, I think it's always beneficial to do that. Many good contractors, again, will invite you to do this. It's a good sign because it means they've got nothing to hide, and also they're busy, right? Because they have projects for you to see. All right, Rose asked another question here. Okay, so Rose asked, so in my experience, price discovery and getting the contractor to provide detailed quotes, line by line, breaking down labor versus material costs have been difficult. Do you have any tips on how to facilitate that process? Yes, this is actually like a core part of, believe it or not, like our product strategy at Billdr, because we've all had our fair share of handwritten quotes, sometimes illegible, no detail behind it, suspicious numbers that don't make sense. We've all been there. And some contractors will give you very detailed quotes, others won't. It's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. Good contractors will be able to answer all these questions for you. One of the things that we do at Billdr, though, and something that you could also do on your own, is if you actually develop a detailed scope, actually develop your own estimate line by line, with precise measurements and square footage and actual material selection. What you can do is you can actually get rather than asking your contractor for a quote, you can ask your contractor for a bid against that scope of work. That's what we do with all the homeowners we work with. We first develop the estimate so that the homeowner actually has an independent idea from the get-go of how much it's going to cost to build a renovation. And then we take that scope minus the pricing that we developed, and we send it to 2 to 3 contractors and ask them to bid against the same scope. And we send them floor plans and pictures and a video walkthrough, everything that they would need. Oftentimes they'll still want to visit the property as well. But then that creates a lot of transparency, and it puts you more in the driver's seat. The other thing that it allows you to do is to actually do an apples to apples comparison, because you've given them, in effect, the template that they need to fill out. And so if every contractor fills out the same template, you can very easily make comparisons. This is what all general contractors in the commercial space do. This is how anyone who's worked in, infrastructure or energy or oil and gas or mining or building construction, this is how it's done professionally. It's just not that common in home construction, but it is the best way to actually get detailed pricing. And we've actually got a template of that on our website, Rose. So if you wanted to go to billdr.co and click on how it works, maybe Joelle, you can paste the link to the how it works page. Yeah. You can actually see an example of the template that we use with our projects.
I'll do you one better. I'll put a copy of that too.
Perfect. All right, awesome.
Well, there's another one. Is there another one?
I don't see any more questions right now. Do you have any more questions, Joelle?
So, what's the difference between the regular services that you offer and what you offer for projects over $50,000?
Yeah, so the project management versus the project management plus. So whenever we work with a homeowner, if they came through, we worked with them to get an estimate. We put their project out to bid. They end up signing a contractor from the 2 to 3 quotes that they receive through Billdr. Then project management is included on all of our projects, meaning that we're effectively, what that means is we are there to support you whatever happens in your project until the project is finished. We don't leave you and say good luck when you sign a contract with a general contractor. The plus is for larger projects, and the reason we charge for the plus plan is because there's a lot more work to do. Like I mentioned earlier, answering Rose's question, that can sometimes be like a 20-hour-a-week job. Not always. It's more likely a 5 to 10 hour a week job. But that fee actually includes having on-site monitoring of your project. It includes us going there and taking pictures, looking proactively for issues, keeping lines of communication open between you and the contractor. This is especially useful, by the way, for people who are busy. They have jobs. They cannot spend that extra 5 to 10 hours a week on the job. And sometimes it helps for people who are not physically present at the property, right? I mean, if you live in Vancouver, you want to buy a property in Toronto and renovate it, you'll probably want someone on the ground to help you, and that's the service that we provide.
Great. Are there any more questions? Does anyone have any more? Okay, so if you do think of questions later on, we've provided the link so you can book an appointment directly with Raphael, and you can have a consultation with him over the phone. And Raphael, if you go to the next slide, I also want to share our next, I guess that's your Meet link, but we also want to invite you to our next event. Because a lot of people have the question, should I add an extension on my home or get a new home? Do I take the plunge and buy a new property at this point? So we're going to invite an interior designer and a real estate agent, and we will announce who they are soon on May 4th, and we're going to have them have a discussion and discuss the pros and cons of both sides. It'll be really fun. It'll be really exciting. And there'll be another live Q&A session there too. So you can ask our experts what they think and help you make your decision. If there are any other questions, we still have a few minutes. You can ask away. Or if there's anything else, Raphael, is there anything else that you wanted to share that maybe we didn't talk about today?
Lots. What I would recommend is, if you are thinking about doing a home renovation, and if you've already made it this far and you've watched me speak for 50 minutes, I highly recommend, let's just jump on a call. So, you've got the link. I'd be more than happy to talk to you, learn more about your project, see if we can help you at all with whatever challenges you might be facing or problems that you're trying to solve. We're here for you. So just don't hesitate. It's very easy. You can use the link that Joelle provided, and we can talk. So hopefully I'll get to talk to some of you in the coming weeks.
That's great. I'm going to just share this link for the event in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. We really appreciated you coming, and listening to our presentation and also answering all of your awesome questions. If there's anything, you know where to find us. Please reach out, book an appointment with Raphael, or you can always find us on our social media channels, chat with us there. And we're available to chat with you and answer any of your questions at any time. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening. All right.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.